Okay, so today we're going to cover, as you can tell, this is part 2 of our lesson that we started yesterday. And I wanted to break this up into 2 different days because today we're going to focus on taking real life, some people would call them word problems, and we're going to just review some on how to take these word sentences and convert them into algebraic equations that can be solved to determine the answers. So what I've done here, to save you a little bit of time in writing, if you just want to go back later, this is actually number 83 from the homework page that you're going to do, so you don't have to rewrite this. You can just look in your book at number 83. We're just going to work through a few examples together, and then I'll turn you loose on the assignment. There's only 6 problems, I think, in the assignment today. So what we're told here is there's 2 different types of investments that are being made for a total investment of $20,000. So some of our investment is in certificates of deposit, known as CDs, and the other part of the investment is in bonds. So the question that we're supposed to answer is how much will be invested in each type. All right, so we need a variable to begin with to represent one of these investment types. Okay, so I'm looking at this sentence, the second sentence that says if the amount invested in bonds is to exceed that in CDs by 30,000. Okay, so any ideas on a variable that we can use to represent either bonds or CDs? And to me, that's kind of the key sentence to look at when you're trying to decide what variable are we going to use to represent one of these investment types. Any thoughts? The amount invested in bonds is to exceed that in CDs by 3,000. So you want B to represent bonds? B is equal to our investment. Maybe I'll get a little more specific and say investment in bonds. Now I'm just going to put what you guys have said, and then we'll see if you guys like it. Well, according to this, if we're going to let B represent the dollar amount invested in bonds, CDs or bonds really should be 3,000 more than CDs. Isn't that what it's telling us? The amount in bonds is to exceed that in CDs by 3,000. So help me out here. What do you think? Do you want to stay with starting off? So I'm hoping that now that we've started here and looking at the wording, is there a better way of going about this? B plus 3,000, is that CDs? But it says the amount in bonds is to exceed. So in other words, bond investment should be greater than CDs by 3,000. Well, let's start off with a variable that represents CDs. What do you think? And I'm just going to be traditional. I'm just going to use X and Y. You're not wrong if you don't. I'm just going to let X be the investment amount in CDs. Because we're told that the investment in bonds should be that CD amount increased by what? 3,000. So here's the key to setting up these equations. You're going to have one variable total. You're only going to use one variable in these problems, but then you're going to need to show either plus or minus what happens to that variable to represent the other quantity. Okay, so we know that X in this case is our investment in CDs, so 3,000 more than that will be our investment in bonds. So in other words, if we did invest 5,000, you can kind of do yourself a little bit of mental check here before you get started and just put in some real numbers. What if you did invest 200, for example, in CDs? That means 3,200 would be in bonds. Does that match up with what is being said? Okay, so that kind of gives me some assurance that I've set this up the right way. So a total of 20,000 is to be invested. So these two combined, and the way I show these two investments combined is to add them together. Okay, so I've just added the two investment types together, and the total of those investments should be 20,000. And now it's a pretty simple equation to solve. I combine like terms. X plus X is 2X. Two X is 17,000. I'm really running out of space, but I'll come up here and continue. 2X is 17,000. X is 8,500. And we're talking about dollars here. So we know that we must have invested 8,500 in CDs. Sorry about that. Which means 3,000 more than that would be our bonds investment. So here's your final answer. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you're going to be doing on the assignment. Any questions on that first one? You typically will look at the question, and that's going to help you know basically how to set up the variable. All right. This, you don't have to write this out. You can just go back, just write down in your notes that this is number 85 in your book. So that'll keep you from having to write all of that. Okay, we have this employee, and typical of employees, they get paid time and a half for every hour that they work over 40. Okay, she had gross, that just in case you don't know, accounting students will know this later, but gross means before taxes are taken out. This person had gross weekly wages of 442 and she worked 48 hours. What is her regular rate? Okay, so let's just let a variable X represent regular hourly rate because that's what the question is asking for. And so we can go a step further. Her regular pay is going to be 40 times whatever that rate is. Would you agree with that? 40 times whatever this regular hourly rate is will be her, what we would call regular pay or salary. So this is an hourly rate. What we've done here is come up with a weekly pay amount, 40 hours times whatever that is. Well, how do we come up with overtime? We're told that overtime is paid at time and a half. So how could I, if I represent regular pay like this, how can I represent overtime pay? Well, overtime is time and a half, which is like saying 1.5 times the number of hours worked over 40, which how many in this case are hours over 40? 8. Times some rate, which we don't know yet. That's what we're trying to figure out. So we have, just like we had before, we had an expression that represented CDs and another one that represented bonds. Well, here we have an expression for regular and then another expression that represents overtime. And then what do you think we're going to do with those? Well, total pay, total gross wages will be these two added together. Okay, let's just go ahead and do this part. What is 1.5 times 8? 12. So basically, I'm going to take the expression that we're using to represent non-overtime, which is just strictly 40 hours times some rate, and we need to add to that whatever she gets from overtime pay. And these two together should equal what? 442. And of course, if you need a calculator for this, that would be fine. Combine like terms, 52x is 442. Anybody have their calculator out? You can just double check and make sure we're going to come up with what we're supposed to. Make sure I didn't make a simple mistake. So if you divide 442 by 52, 850, okay. So the amount that she basically makes per hour, she's got a job paying $8.50 per hour. So what do you think? Was that straightforward? Any questions? Anybody? Everybody's good? Okay, I just have a few more examples. Again, you don't have to write all this down. This is actually number 88 in your textbook, problem number 88. So this is a good little problem of going into the final. The final counts 2/3 in this case of the final grade. This particular student has test scores of the following. Okay, so let's just set this up a little bit. This is really a two-part answer. Let's just answer this part first. What score does Mike need on the final in order to earn a B? And their grading scale is just like ours. The lowest B that you can have number-wise is an 80 because we've gone to a 10-point scale now. So let's just set this up. X is going to represent, again, it's pretty common that you let the variable represent whatever it is the question is asking for. Well, the question says, what score does Mike need? So X is going to represent that score. I'll just explain it like this. Score needed for a B. Okay, well now let's do an equation to represent how the final grade is calculated. And for a B, we know that the minimum that he has to have for a B, this is going to have to equal 80. So if 2/3 of his grade is the final, 2/3 times this score is the final, then that means 1/3 of that grade comes from the average of these. Okay, so this is, I'll just break this up for you. This will be like his test scores. And this would be his final exam. I didn't need this x here. Sorry. So 1/3 of his grade will come from the average of these. 1/3 of test scores. I'll just show it like that, and then we'll calculate what that is. Okay, so do some quick math with your calculator and tell me what this average is. He has test scores, which represents 1/3 of his overall. 1/3 of this 80 average is going to come from the average of these test scores. So does anybody have that average? $85. Okay. Well, now, again, that's only 1/3 of his overall average, so we need to do 85, which is the average of the scores, times 1/3. And somebody give me that. $28.3. Okay, so the average of these test scores, 1/3 of that average comes up to 28.3, and now we need to come up with what that final exam score needs to be, which represents the other 2/3. So you probably can see what to do here. We're going to subtract 28.3 from both sides. And what is that? Say it again. 51.7. Is that right? And now how are we going to solve for x? Multiplying by 2/3, how do we, what's the inverse of multiplying by 2/3? Okay, multiply by the inverse, multiply by 3/2 on both sides. So in your calculator you can do 51.7 times 3 and then divide that by 2. Okay, and we just rounded it up to the next. You said 77.55, and this just represents rounded to the next whole grade. Now I'm not going to take the time. It's actually a two-part answer in your book, but the follow-up question is, well, what would he need to score a 90? So how would we change this? Real simple. Yeah, we just change this and then go about it the same way. And that answer, in case you're wondering, that answer should be 93. Okay, I think this is my last example. Again, you don't have to write all the wording, just put that it's number 89 out of your book. Okay, so again, if you'll just focus on, obviously you want to read through the information carefully, but the question that we're supposed to answer is, what is the home's original price? So that needs to be the variable. We're defining a variable that will answer the ultimate question. Multiply this by 150%. Well, remember, it's going to be reduced by. So in other words, the original price minus the original, that's really what we're trying to find. The new price is $425, but that's after the discount. That's after the reduction. So it's like saying we started with this price, we reduced it by 15% of that price to come up with the new price. So I'll stop there and see if that makes sense. and that would actually increase it. Just multiplying by 1.15. Is that what you're saying? I think that works. You can try it. I think that's the same thing. All right. So I do want you to. I mean, a big part of this exercise is how to define a variable and then how to write the equation. So how do we combine like terms here? 0.85 x is 425,000. So what do we get when we divide? Anybody have that? 500, so we're right. Okay, and then the follow-up question is, well, how much can be saved with this reduction by 15%? Well, that's just taking the original price minus the new price, and that's how we got 75,000. Cool? Questions? It is a deal. Okay, I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to go right into your actual homework assignment. So this is going to conclude the video, and thank you for your cooperation.